Welcome everyone to today's webinar on keeping quality high with engineering efficiency, which is actually part one of a three-part series Sauce Labs is hosting as part of the continuous innovation series. For those I don't know, I'm Joe Colantonio. I'm the founder of the Test Guild, which is an online education platform and community dedicated to helping software engineers succeed with all things automation and testing. And I'm really excited to be joined with two other awesome experts, Mac and Gabe. So let's go around the room and introduce ourselves. Let's start with you, Mac.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. My name is Matt Clark. I'm a senior solutions engineer. I've been here with Sauce Labs for 3 years, started as a developer advocate. I've come on board as a senior solutions engineer, which gives me a really in-depth view of what our customers use in terms of the different people I'm exposed to. And then before that, I was a full stack dev at Nike. And then before that, I built a fly fishing game on Steam, video game called Fishing on the Fly. And then before that, I was one of the fintech original founders, the company called Copilots, where I was a front-end engineer to a full stack developer as well and a team lead there. So thank you. I appreciate it, Joe, and looking forward to our conversations today.
Awesome. Great to have you. And Gabe.
Glad to join Joe and Mac on this webinar. I'm in product marketing at Sauce Labs for about 3.5 years. Joined via acquisition of API Fortress, an API testing startup. About 12, 15 years of experience, mostly on the product marketing and product management side, cloud infrastructure, cybersecurity, mobile endpoint security.
Yeah, great experience. So really excited about what we're going to get into today. So let's set the stage for what we're really going to be diving into. It's all about continuous quality and what it is and, why it's so important. So maybe based on experience and what you all have seen, maybe Mac, we could kick it off with you to talk a little bit about, what this is all about.
Sure. The slide we're looking at here today is basically the idea of traditional testing, sort of that testing pyramid. And then the problem with that, of course, is that you're basically creating a bottleneck for yourself. So when you're talking about quality, if you have a bottleneck, then you're not going to be able to achieve velocity in these situations. So how are organizations overcoming that? Well, they're shifting left, they're doing testing earlier in production, and then they're shifting right and doing testing in later on, catching crashes and errors potentially in production. So if you hit it one more time, I think you can see for the Sauce Labs, what we're looking at is what continuous quality means. And today, when we're going to be looking at that, we're going to be talking about efficiency and why, because it is basically the foundation and the bedrock of what we need to do here to ensure quality, to remove bottlenecks, achieve velocity. So that's really what this conversation is about. And it's going to basically, in some ways, be a review of the fundamentals about testing strategies and things that you can do to accelerate your testing, to catch up with production. We'll hint at it, but there's some Copilot suggestions or that developers now are spending more and more time in developing faster. That's going to put more and more pressure on these continuous integration, deployment and integration environments. And so quality has to really be fundamental to that aspect. It is the bedrock where everything is built from.
Absolutely. This is like the holy grail. We see here shift left, shift right. So what I love about Sauce Labs, Mac, is that, you all have seen it all since you work with so many companies across all kinds of industries. So I'm sure you have a bunch of different themes or maybe horror stories you're hearing from devs or QA leaders around continuous quality. Like what have you seen with this? Maybe things that they're struggling with or what you've been hearing to actually achieve continuous quality.
Yeah, I beyond like working through our own customers, which I can touch base on, but I think we're all familiar now with CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
$5 billion to $10 billion international impact is what people are estimating. The analysts are estimating that this cost the entire economy. And we're talking about something that, yeah, it is, kind of like on a root level system kit for the OS, but it is something that the CI/CD process, if it was done correctly, should have picked up. And so ensuring that quality, has that cost. So when I think of a horror story, I think of people stranded. We have a lot of clients that are airlines. We have a lot of financial companies. What does it mean when you can't get your bank balances? What does it mean when you can't catch your flights? What does it mean when the computer doesn't even start up? Right. So, I think that's the number one biggest horror story that I could think of is in that sort of CI/CD misstep around quality. And if you had sound quality practices, and I think there was an organizational failure there, And mind you, I think I am a CrowdStrike stock owner prior to that. I don't know if I have to review that, but I am literally talking about them, as if this happened. But that is a very public thing that has happened in the domain. From that, I see other customers when I dig into their actual usage, I can see tests running for like 30 hours, and in one case, 7 days. Like, what does that mean when your velocity is that? And how responsive are you, and what value is that sort of data coming back to you? What are you gaining from it if it's taking so long to get it?
Yeah, and what I love about that example of CrowdStrike is there's so many dependencies we have now with software we may not even think about. So who would have known that another company's software going down would affect me being able to get on an airline? I mean, that's critical for us to realize that we need to make, I guess, our software more resilient to be able to handle these types of things that are actually out of a control. So that's a great example of that, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I think it highlights, generally that the pain point of everything's so interconnected now. We have become a digital first. We spend more time on our phones, right? So digital confidence isn't just that your app is performing correctly today. It is also and I think we're going to dive into this later, the things that you're putting in your app too. There's other stuff going on that you need to validate beyond. You could be the best at what you do, but if somebody else not in your organization isn't, that could have downstream impact, and that will have serious consequences in loss of reputation and revenue.
Absolutely. And what I also see with this particular issue with continuous quality, trying to get there is flakiness. So I speak to a lot of people on my podcasts and my events, and they all talk about struggling with, flakiness and testing, and many of them start either ignoring tests or not automating things that should be automated. Have you heard from developers or testers struggling with maybe flakiness in testing that's causing this efficiency issue that not causing a roadblock to get them to really achieve this holistic quality across the whole life cycle?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, from these cost of delays, right? Sitting there to potential other problems with that. But the QA leaders have basically decided that during this sort of retraction inside of the tech industry, right? QA is not necessarily getting as much love in the quality, because I think, to your point here, that flakiness, if you don't have a test result that you don't understand, and you don't have confidence in it, and that flakiness is killing your testing, then it's going to really impact on your decision making downstream, and you're not going to be able to have the critical insight that the engineering leaders that are looking at this and need metrics to drive the quality of software. You're not going to have that. So really, when we take a step back and we look at this, we need to talk about flakiness 100%, and we need to talk about practices like atomic testing and keep it simple and making functional tests, because those simple pass fail insights, when you're decoupled and you're getting results back in a minute, 2 minutes, and you're running these things very specifically, that fundamental approach is sort of a horror story that I see at Sauce. Some people are doing it very, very well. They get great insights back from this information. When you make those atomic tests, right, you're less flaky. There's more variables at play. You're not trying to do all kinds of things inside of that test. It's very specific for one thing. And driving down that flakiness is key to understanding what's going on inside of your testing. Without those core pieces of true data, you cannot make good, insightful decisions.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you can have almost like a safety net for when developers checking code, they know that it's going to be checked and they can make sure that everything's going well. So along these lines, then, I think this is a pretty interesting stat on how, according to Gartner, in 2026, 70% of software engineering teams will adopt a continuous quality strategy, which is up by 20% in 2023. So now I spoke with many experts on my podcasts and events, and they're all seeing this as well. And I think this analysis points to the need to prepare for, I think, what's soon going to be a rapid adoption of continuous quality. So one step I see there is working on test efficiency that we covered a little bit about already. So I think to truly embrace quality, organizations like we saw in the past on the previous slide really need to shift left and incorporate testing early in the software development phase, and also shift right, which I think a lot of people miss out on in production, to ensure that this quality feedback loop is happening, and then kind of informing the development, what they're learning, and then baking it in and really building quality all along and focusing on risk all along the way as well. So really more of a quality holistic approach. So I think this is a pretty shocking stat in that. That's why I think a lot of companies need to embrace it. What's interesting though is, from my experience, is a lot of times companies see quality as almost like a cost center rather than a value add. But I think as we move towards this type of world where we're trying to ship quicker, faster into the hands of our customers, and we need to really hit on this continuous quality, it's going to be really seen more as a value add so that testing is going to become more and more important. And I think, we're going to touch on this a little bit more, that this really will affect the bottom line of your companies, because there's so many competitors out there nowadays that if for some reason your software does not have quality baked in, that if something goes wrong, it can easily hop to another competitor. So really it's quality is a value add. And I think it's up to us that we need to start educating our leaders, product owners, that this is something they need to stop focusing in on, because it's not just something that's a nice to have, it's going to be a must to have. And also, I think along these lines as well, if you work in a regulated environment, like I used to work for a healthcare and financial company, there's going to be even more pressure to really bake in continuous quality due to risk that can be impacted on your users. And also user experience is going to be really top of mind of everyone. So Gabe, curious to know from your thoughts and what you've seen, are you hearing from product leaders that there's going to be an increasing need for QA to be involved and also risk management of digital products that they're creating?
Yes, this is a recurring theme we're hearing from all of our top customers. Really, quite often, the biggest risk, whether it's 10 years ago or today, it's still poorly defined business requirements, building stuff that customers don't like, they don't want. So why don't we get product QA and developers to work much closer together? And that's really at the core, I think, of continuous quality. And with low code, no code, you're enabling these different types of stakeholders to be involved and make sure that we're going to go live with assets that people can really use.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like with low code, no code, AI, we're going to be able to deliver even faster, creating more and more code. What do you need to do when there's more and more code? You need to test more. So I think this is really going to make it even more important that we focus more on quality, because it's going to be a tsunami, I think, of new innovation going on. So I guess this leads us to, okay, we went over what is continuous quality, what is efficiency, why it's important. So what's the challenges? What do you think are holding teams back? For myself, and I know from talking to Sauce Labs in the past, I think you're seeing the same things. We came up with three main areas we think that are really causing challenges for teams to get to that optimal quality, uh, continuous quality that we're all aiming for. The first one is long test cycles. This will drive a team crazy. The more code they have, the more tests they write, the longer it needs to run these tests. So this has been a big hindrance, because if a test fails, new code is being checked in and a new test is being run. So you need to be able to maintain and find these issues quickly rather than waiting around. So I think Mac hit on this already. You need more atomic tests, more targeted tests, that when they fail, you know why that failed. And also having environments that are able to scale up with you as we write more code, more tests. We need to have environments that are able to spin up, run these tests quickly, shut down. So I think that all ties into why long test cycles is really causing a hang up with a lot of teams. They haven't figured out the environment issue. I don't think they figured out how the tests need to be more atomic to run to be more effective, that when they fail, you know why they failed. So that's one of the first ones. Second one is maintenance. So more tests you have, the more failure rates you're going to have, and be able to maintain your tests to know when it failed, why it failed. Having that insights is important. But also what I've seen is, and I don't know why this drives me nuts, is a team that is focusing on creating a product for an end user should be focusing on that end user, not focusing on like, all right, I'm gonna have an in-house test lab. I'm gonna have all these devices that I'm gonna maintain. And, you become a maintainer of an environment rather than someone that's trying to deliver code quality to their users. So I think a lot of people get hung up on maintenance, because maintenance starts to add up when you have these in-house dev farms or device farms that they're trying to maintain with all the hardware and the OS updates. I think cause an issue. And also I worked in companies where we had a shared environment where we'd be debugging in there, but we also would have sales doing demos on it, and would cause an issue because we didn't have infrastructure in place to help us with maintenance when something goes down. We all be using the same test infrastructure that was causing issues as well. And also, I think a big issue is also observability. So in the past few years, we've seen a push towards open telemetry with SRE and DevOps teams, but I think we've seen the testing space kind of lagging behind here. So, as many testers and developers will tell you, when something fails, they have no idea why it's failing, and so they have to start debugging. So, having assets in place to let them know, hey, this not only did this fail, but here's a trace log, here's a video recording, here are all these things that help you be able to know that not only did it fail, but hey, maybe you want to look at the subroutine. Being able to have that tie in between a failure and why it failed, having it more rapidly at your fingertips is going to become more and more important as well. So observability is huge. I think there's going to be a big uptick in this. I see a lot of companies going towards test observability in place. So it's something I see really critical as well. I don't know if either you, Gabe, or Mac have any thoughts around either of these three before we get to our poll.
Sure. I mean, I think what you're seeing in that efficiency part, right? I think we might talk about it a little bit later, but what does manual testing mean, right? Like the flakiness of a manual test too. Like there's all kinds, and that's pretty inefficient. I think we've kind of skipped ahead, started talking about automated testing, but I think it's worth for us to like pause for a second and say, still today, manual testing is the majority potentially of those use cases out there, and they are not efficient. And I think the way that you can talk about you mentioned core competency here, I think for a minute with that developer, if he's spending time getting back these bugs from the manual testing and those people are siloed and it's just creating this bottleneck, and we're expecting the amount of development cycles to increase. You need to be efficient. Again, this is really core to removing that bottleneck for the test can be. And so we're seeing removing from manual testing to automated testing. This space is expected to grow from like, I think 30% a year ago. It's moving right along with the continuous part up to 70% in a couple, 3 years. I think you can expect to see a lot of automated tests. And I think you can expect to see those manual testing environments go away. And then some of these things starting to fall on the developer, who is going to need tools to help them understand where they've lost this information before, where they're kind of throwing it over a wall. It's somebody else's problem. Well, now it's not somebody else's problem anymore. And I think automated testing is here to help them. And we need to make sure that less flaky tests, right? The atomic, all of these core things about automated testing are in place and best practices are in place as that foundation and bedrock for this efficiency.
Absolutely. Hey, John Wanke in the chat makes a great point. I forgot to mention this. He says testing efficiency could be improved if test runs target only code that was checked in. And I see that as well. A lot of times people say, oh, we'll just run our test where anything checks in all the time. And because you have maybe flaky tests, they'll fail, but they necessarily don't fail because the check-in. Having that tie in between knowing what code was checked in and what tests will run to cover just that code will go a long way towards efficiency. That's a great point, John. So thank you for pointing that out. If you are struggling with test efficiency, what are the ways you can improve your test efficiency? We went over why test efficiency is important. What are some of the blockers? So what can you do then to help with it? So we touched on this a little bit already, and I think it's a huge point, is really consolidating your test infrastructure. Having infrastructure in place that's able to handle all these different types of tests is going to be critical. And so one of the things I've seen as well is a shift from, and a lot of times we talk about buzzwords like digital transformation and mobile first, but since the pandemic, I think we have seen a big, strong move towards going mobile first. And with this, obviously, I don't think a lot of companies were prepared for it. And one way we see is with the test infrastructure, because if you've been testing web apps all along, there's a lot of other things you need to keep in mind when you're testing mobile devices. So this is a point as well that we've seen here, that having this test infrastructure in place, especially for mobile first companies, is going to be a huge thing as well. So some main points here, I think also is the maintenance you get when you have better test infrastructure in place, and also being able to scale. So having the right infrastructure in place at the right time to be able to scale them up and scale them down is going to be a game changer, kind of along the way what John Wanke was saying in the comments about test efficiency. Having that infrastructure to spin up and down based on what type of test you need at what place within that pipeline is going to be a huge thing. And so goes a long way to helping you with your tests, even scaling your tests and running your tests faster. If for some reason you did have monster tests, it's not efficient, but it's effective. If you do have an infrastructure, you could scale up and down to go with your tests to get that runtime down. Mac, any thoughts on mobile when it comes to how it may help and how maybe it's harder for people to do mobile testing than web testing, and maybe what some of the differences might be that you're seeing?
Yeah, 100%. I think, you're hitting the head on the nail on the head in terms of it is harder, right? And browser testing's been around for 20 years. It's a very mature space. We understood pretty early we needed to do cross-browser testing. But you look at devices as a unique challenge. Not only do you have, right, multiple potentially, fragmented chips and devices and computers at play, you have different OS levels on these devices. Then you could even drill down into the different browsers. It's added just, a more and more things to this equation that make it that much more difficult to get to quality across all of these. There's just a much more of an infinite set of combinations than you're looking at. So that has a unique challenge to it. And then you take into fact that you have things like geolocation. What does it mean for me to be showing up in this place? We didn't really have that with browser. And you have language challenges based on that. And there's just so many things go into it. And so, the ability for you to sit back and say, hey, I had confidence in Chrome. Chrome seemed to be a pretty good thing. And I could do here and then test edge cases. I think you really need to look at the demographics of your core base, or what market you're in. Are you in Europe, North America, where you're at? And look at basically 95% of your device coverage that you need. And then make sure you're testing extensively, because these things do pop up all over the place. If you're on Safari on an iOS device and you're, running, like 16 in terms of the iOS 16, it's a lot more challenging.
Absolutely. Another point I forgot to fail to mention is with infrastructure and having the right thing in place. More and more companies are going towards DevSecOps, trying to build security into their pipelines, and having a quality platform that's able to handle not just functional tests, but also accessibility testing, security tests, performance tests, all along the pipeline is going to be able to help really increase coverage and I think quality across different teams as well. So I see this as a growth area also, along with mobile testing, having that infrastructure to handle it also.
Right. I mean, we saw we talked about the pandemic. I wish we could put it behind us, but we had companies that built their phone, like the carts were no longer there, right? So they built these DIY places in a closet in their home. There were several homes that I talked to that people burned down. People didn't anticipate the battery, right? Like being used, but more importantly, security. Like why go through team management and all these things that were already in place? If you start maintaining this infrastructure that goes against your core competency, you want to be the best at what you do. You need to make sure that you're hiring those developers to do that thing. And that thing is not maintaining infrastructure. And so when we talk about doing like security at scale, that means that we are experts in this. And so we can leverage that across all of these different browser combinations and devices.
It's another great point. A lot of companies also went remote. I know a lot of people are trying to get away with remote, but remote is here to stay. And if they had an in-house device farm during something like that happened to us, disaster, where if you're able to have a platform that everyone can access from the cloud, life's changing for everyone, accessible to everyone, makes it a lot easier for everyone to get quality insights as well, to be able to log in and see what's going on. Also, I think is a key thing to help. We touch on this a little bit, and I think with mobile apps, a lot of times it's we have to deal with native mobile apps, private real devices, mobile visual regression testing, and mobile app distribution. When someone downloads an app nowadays, as I mentioned, there's so many other options that if it doesn't perform well within the people attention spans again small and smaller, that when they go and try to download an app and it doesn't work for them, they delete it, never to be seen again. So having quality in place really gives your company, I think, a big advantage, because you're able to make sure that when someone does download your app on a mobile device, it does perform well. It's not draining the battery, and it's working against all the things. And also, I think it's important is I love this mobile visual regression testing. When it comes to mobile apps in different sizes, you don't necessarily know how big the screen's going to be. You don't know if it's going to be on a watch, right? So as you're trying to run against all the things, able to have a platform that can run against not only all the devices, but also all the different flavors, and having visual regression tests to say, yeah, okay, functionally it works, but you have a layover that's making it so your users can't click on the buy now button. That's going to cause a big issue. And a lot of times companies don't even think of this. They think, oh, we have unit tests, we have functional tests that are working, because the functional test is just manipulating a browser, not a user doing it. Having the mobile visual regression test is going to pop out things that even probably a real user couldn't see. And when I was working in healthcare, we used to do radiology, and so looking at the X-ray of someone is very hard to do. But using visual regression, we'll be able to point out things that even manually we weren't able to see. And so I think having visual regression built in for mobile is a game changer as well. It's really going to help towards continuous quality as we move towards this kind of mobile first as well. So I think this is a huge thing. Also, Mac, any correlation you see maybe between improving test efficiency and maybe test coverage to make mobile testing easier, especially across all these devices and things that we're seeing?
All right, well, I want you to hold that thought
I
for a
may have
second.
moved the poll. I may have missed the poll popped up here. Is that what you're going to go towards?
No, no. What I would like to do is just go back just a second and talk, because I think arming the viewers, right, with the reason as we're moving from manual to automated, and people are starting to question whether quality is important to the whole, not, cost cutting. The great argument here is what we're finding out, and you hinted at it or spoke to it a bit. If you have a crash or a hang and you're not getting coverage in that production, and if that's not, you don't get coverage there, and I guess it's kind of covering both, but if you don't get coverage there, all of a sudden those users leave. They're gone. 20, like they won't come back. They're lost customers. And if we even put this in framing it for the ratings on the app stores themselves, if you have a 4 and 5-star rating, your adoption is 90 to 95% from your marketing material. What happens when it goes down to a 3-star rating? That adoption drops to 50%. Quality in this digital confidence is key to your business, and it's also key to your ROI. If you're having to spend twice as much money on marketing later, then you're really lost here because you're having to do it behind the curve. So why not get in front of the curve and have that win-win for everybody, and have the highest quality software coming out from the gate, and not have to worry, maintain those 4 or 5-star ratings, or get to those 4 or 5-star ratings and maintain that, because that way you won't have to spend twice as much money on marketing down the way. So there's a real tie there between that. Now, as far as coverage, I think you mind rephrasing that, or not rephrasing it, re-asking the question?
Just talk about coverage in general against like native mobile apps, and how maybe teams may not be equipped to understand what that entails, because they're so used to web testing.
Yes, and I think the different geographic locations, but also that these
Yep.
teams are siloed, right? I
Yep.
think when we look at efficiency and we look at the different reasons as we're looking at coverage for different markets and different areas, the ability to hand off a video, the ability to do it in a unified platform, and be able to take these teams that were disparate in the remote work, it's here to stay, and put these people back together on one platform in one place, so that they can get the insights, the observability they need. They can hand off to each other, make it easier for them to collaborate and to get to these things faster. And then in that shift right, that same idea, that mean time to detection of an issue and the mean time to resolution of that issue, to lessen the impact of anything that does escape into production, right? To have that observability. So Sauce Labs really is focused in on our platform for, like, this isn't just, a marketing pitch, this continuous quality, the shift left and shift right. We do have things inside of our platform that cover all of these. And on that shift right place, you can just quickly separate, for me, when I see a user experience that's gone bad, what's the thing that's going to affect it the most? A crash or a hang. An error, an ad not being served right, okay, that's throwing maybe a little error. Let's ignore it. But the ability for you to go in instantly and say, here's a crash, here's a hang, I need to escalate this automatic Slack. I mean, this is what exists today. You can create an automatic ticket around that Slack, or fire off directly to that engineer instantly and said, we have a problem right now. And to compress what was, in some cases, a week-long cycle to, an hour. That is a distinct possibility in using this in something that is a strong leverage flip, a lever to flip here so that you can keep your customers, keep them happy,
Yeah,
keep
it's a
that
good
user
point.
experience, right?
Yeah, the user experience is critical, and seeing is believing. A lot of times, a developer would say, "Works on my machine." Now you actually have video to say, "Well, it's not working, and here's proof." And what's even good is you mentioned geolocation, and maybe working in your area, but it may not be working in another geolocation. That's probably another thing that you probably can uncover to say, "That's interesting. Why is it failing here?" And being having all those trace stacks and everything in the videos is probably going to go a long way to helping.
We'll partner with you. We can help match those insights, right? So if you know you're in the North American market and you need to know what the Android devices are, the iOS devices are, and then you can create your testing, and we will show you visual representations of that device coverage to know that you've got coverage into your markets and your major 95% of the customers that are going to be using your app and the scenarios that are under it. I mean, you mentioned the screen resolution. This is huge. Browsers didn't have a trifold phone that was brand new that just, I mean, right, there's new trifold phones
Yeah.
that are coming out and these different devices, all of these different resolutions. It's not 1080 or 4K. These things are going to be wild. And your ability to go in and use something like the visual ability to sit back and take these UIs and all these things inside of Sauce Labs and say, here, I want to slide this marker, and this is going to highlight where the change is and showing me visually, quickly, fastly. So if I'm a developer, I don't have to spend tons and tons of time here, and even in QA, but really there's a lot of shift that's going on to developers. It's imperative for them to have speed, and that visual tool is going to give them that sort of speed and velocity.
So I know a lot of times, back in the day, something would fail. And if you didn't know why it failed, it took you hours and hours to figure out why. Now, what I said earlier with SREs and DevOps, they're pushing um, baking observability into their program. So when they do fail in production, there's a trace, and not only can they say why it failed, but they can even go and say it failed in this subroutine and fix it immediately. And I think this actually adds to a unified visibility to getting insights into why it failed, not just that this test failed, but knowing why it failed, and also getting insights into was there a memory leak now, because you're able to capture all these log files. And what I love about the future is AI driven failure analysis, that you're getting all these logs at one time and being able to correlate it manually is very time consuming. This is a great use case, I think, for machine learning, something it was made for, rather than maybe Gen AI. Gen AI is great, but using AI to really bubble up maybe insights that, hey, over the past month, this has been performing at this level, and now all of a sudden it's performing at this level. Letting these insights before your customers find it is going to be huge. And being able to fix these issues before your customers are impacted, before your application is down, is going to be huge. So a lot of areas here. I know, Mac, you started to get into it a little bit more, but a little more maybe how you're seeing how being able to debug test uh, and getting test coverage, where it all lies in where we're seeing here with observability, how it helps get us there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is that you may be making the best application in the world. You may have the best team set up in the world, and you may release 100% bug-free products right out to the marketplace and applications. But today's modern environment is made up of a number of APIs and SDKs that are in that application. It's an interconnected development environment where we're relying on each other. And I think it is absolutely critical, even if you're doing the best of the best, for you to realize that out of left field, this SDK bloat plays a big part in your application quality as well. And that is something that you need to take into account for your regression and observability. It may be something that you weren't thinking about for a regression test, and all of a sudden it wasn't you that broke it, but it was your vendor. And then what does that mean? And then how do you catch that? Because of this interconnectivity. So I think it's critical to have this observability and then to understand your customer and driving into the insights for that device coverage. I think there's all kinds of really great data-driven ways that we're going to be moving into the future to be able to say, hey, these are key pieces of metric. Here's the things that I'm going to take, and I'm going to drive out this efficiency as an engineering leader and as a thought leader and say, I know for my organization, these pieces are critical, and here are these things. And one of them has to be this idea of efficiency and quality inside of my practice at that fundamental level. hinted, but again, if you have a set of flaky tests and you have mixed results, or you have an SDK doing this and you don't catch these different scenarios, it's juggling balls in one way, if you will. You will end up with that escape defect. And then we've seen the cost of this. So how can I wrap around as many different, sanity, functional, black box testing, or, regression testing? All of these things have their place. And especially for, I think, realizing we're relying now on this digital confidence in a digital world where we spend more time on our phones. This is a corner to our experiences, and it needs to be, you need to have that insight and to be able to do this at scale, to understand all these different scenarios that can impact your business.
I love this, and this all goes back to that first slide. Shift right for performance has become more and more critical. I talked about this before on a lot of my podcasts with a lot of thought leaders, but when I started, everything was deterministic. We had a raised floor, we had bare metal, everything was under our control. You could say we tested this, and when it went into production, it pretty much was on par with what you tested. Nowadays, it's a big shift. We're going more non-deterministic. Like, I don't know what services I'm consuming necessarily. I don't know where I'm running in AWS or what segment I'm running on. So a lot of things are out of your control. So even if you test perfectly and shift left, which you should be, and before you get to production, when you go to production now, it's a wild, wild world out there. And being able to have a platform that's able to get those insights from production is going to be game changing. I know a lot of companies are starting to move towards feature flagging and canary testing, where they'll kind of roll out features to see how it behaves in the wild and be able to react or roll back before a customer even is impacted. So I think it's going to be a game changer here. Shift right is going to become even more and more important. And having AI, even though I know it's been more of a buzzword, I think we're going to start seeing, because of all this information, it is going to be able to analyze a lot of this information and give you the insights you need before your users are impacted.
I guess I sort of forgot to mention this in one way. I mean, AI is a buzzword, but
Yeah.
machine learning is a branch of AI, right? It's not Gen AI.
Yeah.
Today at Sauce Labs, we 100% do, for an individual customer, siloed for that information, do root cause analysis and failure analysis. So if we start seeing what machine learning is really good at is picking up on patterns, right? We start seeing that, we can bring that forward to you and give you the visibility into it.
What I love about Sauce Labs is they work with all kinds of customers across all, like I said, all kinds of different industries, and they see what works and what doesn't work. And so they have this great case study I was reading about earlier about Indeed, and I'm glad that Gabe brought this up. So Gabe, maybe a little background on what you've been seeing with companies like Indeed and how they've actually had a competitive advantage when they work on efficiencies to make quality even better.
Thanks, Joe. This case study from Indeed really puts a punctuation on this webinar, because these three strategies were implemented perfectly at Indeed. First, just giving a quick overview, let's get at the root of why Indeed was able to double coverage in 6 months. And that gave them enough full-time engineering, or FTE hours, to understand their customers better, which drove incredible improvements in collaboration, getting that product team closer to developers and QA, and ultimately in the business outcome. You're going to hear at the end of what I'm saying, what business leaders really liked about this continuous quality approach. Background. Indeed, like so many companies during the pandemic, with so much more remote work, really needed to transform quickly. As the world's #1 job board, they service 350 million monthly users in over 60 countries. So they needed to flip their testing pyramid on its head and do a big shift left. And that's why they turned to us with a focus first on how do we transform test efficiency in order to do that. And so looking at our strategies, first, consolidating the test infrastructure, consolidating all these testing tools and getting one source of truth and one source of test management. Really, what this drove from a leadership perspective was injecting more QA quality insights and data into the pipeline early for developers. This sounds like it might increase dev effort with all these new tools giving more and more feedback, more and more data, but it actually decreased effort and improved DevX by increasing, release confidence early. So a lot of things they did early to improve observability, to eliminate flakiness and increase test stability was by consolidating with Sauce Labs, they're able to deploy hermetic, these with self-contained dependencies, these hermetic environments, and as needed, these ephemeral or on-demand test environments. So you did a lot of white box testing early in hermetic environments that allowed them to focus on signals without wasting test cycles and MTTR on noise. And then when they needed more integration testing and they needed to understand more about their feature flagging and more about their app or distribution or beta testing, really needed to understand that really easily by simply deploying ephemeral environments easily with Sauce Labs. So having all of that at your fingertips created incredible efficiencies. So at the end of the day, with the greater efficiencies, not only did engineers and developers work better together, and there's better DevX as they're working with signals rather than noise and less flakiness, it ultimately let them understand their customer behavior so much better that business leaders began to see testing as a competitive differentiator because they were getting critical insight to business leaders about what their users needed. And this allowed Indeed to successfully transform for a massive migration from web usage to mobile usage, particularly for a native app that was doing, temp work and gig economy work. And that, in 60 countries requires lots and lots of updates. And so they needed to have that greater test efficiency to match that scale of updating. And they did so successfully by consolidating with us.
Now let's get some questions really quick. The first one, and this is pretty funny. We were talking about it in the pre-show on ephemeral environments, and Gabe touched on a little bit at the end. Anonymous wants to know: are you seeing any companies be successful rolling out ephemeral end-to-end test environments cloned from production and only used when needed, or is it too complex for most? It sounds like Indeed is doing something like this. Gabe, is that what you?
You're right. The complexity is one of the key barriers, but you can solve that complexity by using CI/CD pipelines to optimize their iterative development. So just like with microservices, you can have a separation of concerns. Let's get CI/CD pipelines more granular. So with feature flagging, like using Launch Darkly, you're able to have very granular development and therefore more atomic testing. And that allows you to deploy the ephemeral end-to-end test environments without the complexity.
I have some real world stories for this. Hopefully I don't take up time, but when I worked for a healthcare company, we had all these really weird applications that were developed years ago that we had like one expert in that would configure it. And then we had 8 sprint teams, and each sprint team was different. They didn't have the right setup. It wasn't like production. And so it was a nightmare when we came to the merge of the final code and running in production. So we created ephemeral environments that each team could spin up. It was a known environment to start with, where everything already configured. It saved a ton of time. And also I've seen a lot of teams use ephemeral environments for, like Gabe said, each stage of the pipeline. Sometimes you need to run a performance test. You don't want to hold your whole staging environment to a performance test. You could just run up an ephemeral environment, run your performance test in this other environment, and close it down. And because everyone is using the same test data from a starting known point and end point, I don't think it was too complex. This was a healthcare company that was complex without one. So I think it really helped. So hopefully that answered your question, Anonymous. I don't know if Mac wants to jump in. If not, we go to
I mean, I think I think that you can create some complexity inside of Docker and some other issues, but I think it is key to review the fundamentals here. It is important that you have test data that basically starts and, Joe, just as you said, has an endpoint. If you leave this stuff up in the non-ephemeral environment, what happens is your application will start to slide and you'll get false results and flakiness built in. It's really important, and Sauce Labs does this with inside of what we do. We bring up these specialized compute, right? Our VMs are made for this, and then you use them, and then they're burned down along with the data that's on them. So it's critical that from a best practice perspective, that I think this is something, and I think you can do it basic today. I think there's ways to keep this test data, inside of an instance somewhere, if you will, accessible, and then burn down afterwards. But I think there's an exciting technology coming down the way. We're going to have more and more virtualization and more options in type of using containers. And I think that technology is only a year or two away from being adopted. But if you do look at the enterprise customers, it is the larger enterprise customers that are more specialized this in today, because they can afford maybe more complex CI/CD pipelines, where if I was a person, with a small business and trying to do some of these things for quality, I might have to just make my instance somewhere on AWS to hold my test data and then spin things up here and then burn it down. It's achievable. It's just the larger corporations are leveraging it today.
Great point about test data. Having a golden copy when you spin it up for all your tests is a game changer, because if you have bad test data and your tests start failing just because of test data, people are going to lose confidence. So having ephemeral environments with test data, I think, is a great point, Max. So
and that's kind of going back to this failure analysis. I think it's going to lead into this other question on AI.
yeah,
What does it mean when your QA department today is a bunch of firefighters?
yeah.
Your applications are constantly changing. The developers are like, hey, by the way, this title changed, this CD's different, this movie's different, this thing's different about the app. And you're, like constantly having to be reactive to this in QA. So how can we move this forward? Well, one of the pieces that we've implemented this specifically for machine learning is to look at inside of your tests today, as the developers are throwing changes over the wall at you, how can you get the information to remediate, to solve this quickly? And that is through that failure analysis. And then we also have something today called Appium Inspector. There is two versions of it. There's one maintained by Appium Inspector, but today you can, inside of our mobile environments, launch into, from a failure analysis, straight to the place inside of an Appium Inspector and look for the broken elements and places inside of your tests that those developers have changed and threw that over the wall without telling you.
So Mac, that leads us beautifully, set us up to this question: how can AI machine learning be used to categorize flaky test failures according to product failure, test environment issues, and data issues, etc.? I can't speak for Sauce. I just know I've seen things where you label things when it fails, and then over time it learns why that failed. And so if it happens again, it automatically can apply that failure. So when you log in, say you log in and you have 100 failures, because it was labeled, it knows 99% of them have to do with one error. So if you fix that error, all 100 would pass. That's one thing. And because you've labeled it over time, it starts learning and training itself to know that if it happens again, it automatically can label it. So when you go in to triage, it's automatically bucketed for you where to focus in on. That's what I've been seeing. But Mac and Gabe, I'm not sure, Sauce perspective, what it is.
Sure. I mean, I think I could speak to it really quick. I think I'm going to let Gabe speak to it, or not let Gabe, but Gabe, please feel free to speak to it as well. I think it's exciting, frankly. I think we're talking about how Copilot is kind of like a force multiplier for developers. I think you're going to be seeing the same sort of information for us on our side. What I'm looking forward to with Sauce Labs is, today you don't want to have an AI talking to an AI really at this stage. So you can use Copilot, and we have a very clean interface for that. So you can bring over tests, and if you're doing this correctly by maintaining your code bases and other things, it's a phenomenal future. I think that even using some of the Gen AI capabilities, as long as you're aware with the suggestions and how the classes and the functions work, I think this space, when you have that seed, if the prompts are done correctly, in other words, you won't have these bad answers as much, hallucinations. I've been practicing prompts where, I have a question here, but then I ask it to break down the information so that you can get the thought process. You can challenge these prompts and you can extend them out and really drive some great information from them by bringing that AI and asking it to be an expert and challenging it, so you don't have these sort of hallucinations or misled answers. And I think that's where the brilliance of it comes in, right? If you had an AI that spit out the same engine or the same answer every time, that's called a search engine. This is a reason, and this is going to improve. The AIs are going to be, the algorithms today, they're saying they're already like close to making them 90% faster because you have to keep training these models. It's an exciting space. We're dedicated towards moving into it. Today, we've already have multiple ways that we're using machine learning, and we have some products for Gen AI as well. But I think as you see Gen AI mature, for less hallucinations, more productivity, and that you're going to see us mature along with it.
The only thing I want to add is we'll share a link to a podcast in which the head of Indeed's testing guild, David Morgenthaler, does a great job of describing what they're doing with Copilots, what Gen AI can and cannot do for quality. And I think that from a product point of view, the most interesting aspect is making it easier for product to get closer to engineering and make sure, and by product, I'm referring also to security, to compliance, whether it's compliance as code. These upcoming needs can be better and easier implemented and certainly standardized across all these different tool chains that teams are using across an org with a consolidated test platform.
Yeah, I know a lot of people say AI is overhyped, but I think this is going to be huge. Be able to interact with your results and your all your data you have to prompt it for insights is going to be it's going to be huge. All right, so I guess last question that we have time for is from Daniel. He wants to know, can you speak on situations where teams work mostly with MVPs where the product needs to hit the market with a time constraint? How can we build quality apps with the time constraint? I guess you have to focus in on risk at that point. Different applications have different needs. So if I have a healthcare application, I'm going to want to make sure it's thoroughly tested. If I'm doing MVP, you need to, it depends on what the application is and what the risk areas are. So I would focus in on the risk areas and make sure you have coverage there rather than just getting test crazy, testing all the things. But Mac and Gabe, either one of you have any?
Again, I think it's important to have the platform, right? If you're looking at that, you're going to be iterative fast. You're going to be doing agile. You need fast feedback loops, right? So having one platform to basically collaborate and just to be able to send over a video real quick of like, hey, this is what I just ran into. If sometimes seeing something visual is so much more powerful than sitting down and writing that. But really getting your teams out of the silo, making them agile, consolidating on one platform so that they can collaborate. That would be as you're going through these fast iterative feedback loops.
One of the greatest outcomes of optimizing test efficiency, just like Indeed, is gaining that DevX, that dev productivity, that more efficient space, more gain time, where you can be more confident about these MVPs. Implement things like mobile app distribution, which Sauce Labs does also.
Absolutely. So we answered all the questions. We're ending right on time. I'm really excited. So I just want to thank Sauce Labs. I want to thank you, Gabe. Thank you, Matt, for putting this together. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for all your chats. And we'll see you here next time. Thanks again, everyone.